Well, good afternoon and welcome. I am Job Dittberner from Palisades Village and its Events Committee. We're very pleased to welcome today our guest speaker, Bill Halal. Bill is going to be talking about his most recent book, which is on your screen, Beyond Knowledge, How Technology is Driving an Age of Consciousness. It is a remarkable, even a thrilling book from one who is considered among the 100 most influential futurists. Listen to this. Bill is arguing that the world is at the beginning of a new stage of evolution, a mental, spiritual revolution to kickstart the age of consciousness. It appears, he says, that the world is heading towards some type of historic shift in consciousness, a collective epiphany, a new mindset, code of global ethics, or a spiritual revolution. The age of consciousness, he argues, promises to transform our lives, work, social institutions, global order, and our very minds and hearts. These are not the predictions of the old circus person gazing at an empty crystal ball. Bill is a retired Air Force major who worked on the Apollo lunar landing, then got a doctorate in business at Berkeley, and is now a professor at George Washington University. He started TechCast, a web-based system that pools experts and authorities throughout the world. These are experts on emerging technologies, strategic planning, knowledge, motivation, and institutional change. The National Academy's named TechCast possibly the best forecasting system available. I urge you all to Google Bill at his internet site, William Halal. He has done a lot. He's lectured widely and written prize-winning essays, and he's a longtime member of Palisades Village. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Bill Halal, to tell us about Beyond Knowledge and the Coming Age of Consciousness.
Thank you, Job. Are you ready, Job?
That's it.
Okay.
Let it roll, Bill.
Yes, thank you so much. That was so gracious. I don't know if I can live up to all of that.
I'm confident.
Okay, well, it's especially nice to, I give a lot of talks now with this book out, but it's a special privilege to do it with the villages because you folks are my neighbors and my friends. And you know all my faults, and yet you come anyways. So that's really a sign of friendship. I'm grateful that so many of you showed up. Gosh, we've got almost 30 people here. That's wonderful. Thank you. I started this line of work when I was a graduate student at Berkeley during the notorious 60s. And the thing that caught my attention was that the computer revolution was starting right then. For instance, I was impressed by Daniel Bell's wonderful book, The Coming of Post-Industrial Society. Industrial society was over. And so what was beyond industrial society? And that fascinated me. I've been studying that topic for 50 years now during my academic career. I think it's the most exciting thing you can think about, that the world is changing in our lifetimes and changing dramatically, that it's a privilege to be alive at a time when all of this change is taking place. So I've been pursuing that. I do other things too, but I focus on that. My new book is my 7th book. It's the culmination of all this work, this 50 years of scholarship. And I think I've got it right. I'm very proud of this book. A book is, producing a book is like giving birth to a child, really. Same thing. The gestation period is longer. It's not just 9 months, it's 3 or 4 years of pain and work and anguish and worry. And then when the book is out, it's like a child in the world. You hear about it and you hope it's doing well and you try to help it, but it's out there. I've got 7 of these little babies out there doing whatever they're doing. Anyways, this is my opus magnus, Beyond Knowledge. And what I'm going to show you, I think, is a way you can understand where we are today in terms of his history, in terms of social evolution. This will give you a big picture grasp of the forces that are driving change. And that means we can also anticipate how these terrible crises of our time could be resolved. They may not be resolved. It depends on us, basically. So I don't want to be a Pollyannish here. I'm just describing this study, this academic study, and focusing on the implications. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I want to make this a conversation, a dialogue. So please offer your thoughts and questions. They're going to have to be brief, though. We don't have a lot of time. As we go along, I'll stop and ask if anybody wants to comment. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. Here's a quick overview of my talk. I just want you to get familiar with these terms that I'm going to talk about. But let me first say something about the cover. The design is really my concept, and I just love it. It's the young lady is a goddess. She's a modern day goddess, and she is giving humanity, the earth, she's giving us a vision of a sustainable world, of a global consciousness. And all of the terms here are from the book. So this is a summary of the book. And I just love the idea that we can make this vision accessible. We can define it here, and it's being given to us. So we have to work with that. So here are the themes I want to touch on. First is the life cycle of evolution. This is the result of the original study I did. It's a good scientific study, plotting out the life cycle of civilization. And I'm going to show you that. And I'm going to show you that it's a good example of organized complexity. There's a lot of randomness here, but there's a very definite overall trend as well. And that is useful. It helps us understand where we're going and how we can help get there. Then I'm going to make the argument that we're living beyond knowledge now, right now. Most decisions are based upon emotions and values and beliefs and that kind of thing. So that's a logical step beyond knowledge. I'm going to show you how that's what evolution is driving us to, beyond knowledge into consciousness. And then the major crisis we face, which I call the crisis of global maturity. It's a global crisis, and it forces us, it asks us to become a mature civilization, or we're not going to survive. So that's the crisis of global maturity, climate change and all that stuff. And then I'm going to show that all stages of evolution have been powered by mental, spiritual revolutions, by revolutions in thought. And so we can expect a revolution in thought, I think sometime in the next, I think it's going to be about a decade or so, but it could happen at any time. It may not happen at all. That's possible, of course, but it usually does. So based upon this model of social evolution, it's likely to happen again. And then I'll say a word about technologies of consciousness, which is what we have to think about these days. How do we manage our own consciousness? What tools do we have available? And then we're going to talk about institutional change. This is what's really important. Changing business and government and education, medicine, all of those institutions. And then we're going to end up focusing on what does this mean to you? What are your thoughts about global consciousness and for yourself as well? So that's what we're going to do. Anybody want to offer a comment or a question at this point before I move on? Please. No? Okay. Now, okay, here is the life cycle of evolution. I'm very proud of this. It took me about 20 years to figure this out. And let me explain it. The horizontal scale down here, if you follow my cursor, that is in a logarithmic scale, and it has to be logarithmic or you wouldn't see anything. If it was on ordinary scales, the trend line would just run flat and it would make a sharp right turn up. You wouldn't see anything. But a log scale stretches out the first few decades so we can see what's going on. And a vertical scale are the various stages of social evolution. And I think the next stage is consciousness, really by definition, because you just give it a little thought. If anything is beyond knowledge, it's consciousness. That's, I think, I'll show you how I think that makes perfect sense. And what you see is this S-curve, this big S-curve, tracing the rise of civilization. Now, this is all historic data. This is a science-based study. This is all empirical data. And I've used the data to create a model of the evolution of civilization. And we, just as in all science, we can use the model to make predictions about how it will behave in other circumstances. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, the key, all of this data is historic, except here, the transition beyond knowledge, which I estimate to have taken place 2020. Let me explain why I think that's valid. We started seeing some of this post-factual nonsense maybe 10 years or so ago with Newt Gingrich and Sarah Palin, that kind of thing. But I think it reached a conclusion, a very sad conclusion in 2020 when we saw that lies really were behind the insurrection of our capital. So I take that to be a good point. I don't want to offend anybody politically, but these are the facts. And I think that marks the beginning of an age of consciousness, because we're no longer operating based on facts. See that? And so, and our studies, I will show you a little later, confirm that about 60% of the decisions made by individuals, organizations, and government are based on subjective consciousness, emotions, values, and beliefs. So I'm pretty confident this is a good milestone for the beginning of an age of consciousness. We're operating in that stage right now. It's very confusing, of course. It's not what we might have thought of when you think about consciousness. You think about enlightenment. Well, it's not enlightened. It's a lot more complex. So we'll go into that. So that's one of the main points I want to make, that this indicates that an age of consciousness is starting right now. It's the next logical stage. And I also want to note that all of these data points fit the curve so perfectly. It's really quite amazing. I've worked in engineering and science, and whenever you plot data, there's usually scatter, sometimes a lot of scatter. There's no scatter here. All of these data points fit precisely on this S-curve. When I first saw this, I was flabbergasted. But I think it tells us that the life cycle of evolution is a very precise trend. It has direction. It describes the life cycle of the planet. Just like all organisms pass through a life cycle, it looks just like this. A beginning, a rapid growth, and then maturity. That's the way all of the life cycle of a colony of bacteria would look, or the growth of a human being. It would look just like that. So this is the life cycle of civilization on planet Earth. And it suggests that it culminates during the age of consciousness, that there is a culmination to the life cycle. Doesn't mean it ends. I mean, his life still goes on, of course, but it's totally different after that. I think it's the beginning of the space age, when the planet finally is unified into some kind of functioning global order, able to take on the enormous challenge of exploring deep space out of the solar system. That is going to be heroic, and it's going to take a unified world to do that. So life goes on, but the form of evolution, this form of civilization that we know of, is coming to a conclusion in our lifetimes, in these next few decades. That is a remarkable thing to understand. Okay, I think that's all I have to say about this. Let me open this up for questions. I know you probably have doubts or questions or comments you'd like to make. Please tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment on this.
Okay, Dave.
The horizontal scale says log years before 2500 AD.
Yeah.
So the information revolution box, which is marked 2000 AD, is 500 years from the graph doesn't go to 2500. It goes to 10 years before 2500. So where we are today is just a little bit to the right of the data point on your curve where it's labeled Information Revolution 2020 AD. So an awful lot of this movement toward a new paradigm of civilization, if you like, is all in the future, far in the future. Isn't that true?
Well, the age of conscious, the evolution of the age of consciousness, its continuation is in the future, but everything up till that is historic. It's based upon fact, historic fact. All of these data points are empirical.
All right. So you've marked the point beyond knowledge at 2020.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So
before
from
that,
that point to the right is the next 500 years.
yeah, everything beyond that is the future, of course. That's right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to
So
get.
when that curve is beginning to bend as you approach the maturity crisis in 2020,
Yeah.
what is the justification for that bend? How do we know that it wouldn't be going more straight up?
Daniel, nothing grows indefinitely. Nothing. Stars die. Everything comes to a conclusion. It matures. Life on this planet is maturing. It will continue in a different form, as I outlined. I think it'll be a space age. I've done a lot of work on that. I'm an aerospace engineer, so I know something about that. But the life, as I tried to explain, the life cycle is maturing now, and we're going to reach some kind of maturity, either that or extinguish ourselves as a civilization. That's the choice we face. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, that's fine. We can talk about it later if we want.
Yeah. Why don't you and I talk afterwards about the technical matters? That would be good.
All right, good.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Who else? This asks a lot. I know you must have questions about this. It's very demanding to ask you to believe that there is this precise life cycle of evolution for our civilization, and that it's going to conclude in some kind of a global order or extinction in the next 2 or 3 decades. But that's what I'm saying. That's what I think this study shows. That's what the data shows, I think. Okay, no more questions. Let's move on. We're going to get into more interesting things. Okay, now here's why I think we are moving beyond knowledge to consciousness. And I want to start with the first bullet at the top. The knowledge age has been a roaring success by any measure. There are 16 billion PCs, smartphones, and laptops in the world for 8 billion people. That's on average 2 computers per person. I remember when the information age was starting, about 1980, and I was a young professor, and I would tell people that, I think we're going to be using personal computers. They thought that was the silliest thing in the world. They thought, what would you possibly do with a personal computer? That shows you how hard it is to anticipate these big changes. It's hard to imagine what's going to happen. But here we are, 40 years later, all of us using computers. We spend most of our time doing this. Something similar is going to happen with consciousness. I'm almost certain of it. And now I want to direct your attention to the pyramid here. This pyramid is I think, a pretty good description of consciousness. You could argue about some of the particular terms that are here, the particular types of consciousness, but something like this, I think, is well accepted by the scientific community. The difference between objective and subjective consciousness, for instance, is very well recognized. That's pretty well established. And that's what is important, because the objective types of consciousness, when you perceive something, the 5 senses, when you learn, you store information and you use it to make decisions. That's all objective. That's the kind of stuff you can do on a computer easily. And that's what we've been automating for the last 20 years during the knowledge age. That is all being automated. That's why everybody's terrified. They wonder what happens beyond knowledge. Well, beyond knowledge is subjective consciousness. And that's what my second bullet is about. As AI automates the objective factors of our thinking, then attention is forced up the hierarchy into the subjective realm. So everything beyond knowledge is subjective consciousness. And that's, this confirms what I pointed out in the life cycle of evolution graph, that we are now, here's the evidence, I think, that we're now moving beyond knowledge. And the reason, of course, is stuff like social media. My God, social media makes me think of, and this is the way it's described in the book, it's reminiscent of the biblical tree of knowledge. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they were banished from paradise. And the message is, knowledge is dangerous stuff. It's powerful. You have to know what you're doing with it. And we are not in control of it now. The social media is provoking emotion, controversy, floods of disinformation. It's a major crisis. It's reminiscent of the Gutenberg Revolution, when the first printing press was invented about 600 years ago. The flood of that knowledge caused wars for decades afterwards, and it led to the Protestant Reformation. So we are struggling with this flood of knowledge, and it's forcing us into the realm of subjective consciousness. And I'd like to point out that Henry Kissinger agrees with me. Carolyn found this, my wife found this in Time magazine. He was quoted as saying, "What fascinates me is that we're moving into an era of consciousness that we don't understand very well yet." That's exactly right. We don't understand it very well yet. I'm trying to understand it. And we study this at TechCast, and we asked I have like 200 international thought leaders, experts that I use to forecast critical events. And they estimate that about 70-some% of decisions made by families and individuals are subjective, emotions, values, beliefs. In government and politics, something like that, like almost 80%. And it's in organizations like corporations, it's a little more modest, like 40, but still almost half. So I think this confirms that we are there now. We're in an age of consciousness now, just very confusing. Okay, any comments or questions about this before I move on? Okay, now, here's what I call the crisis of global maturity. I did this a couple of years ago with a colleague, Michael Marion, and it drew a lot of attention. It was reprinted in a number of journals and magazines. We did a kind of a trend analysis. We found 15 trends driving what we call the global mega crisis. And you know what they are: climate, pandemics, all of that stuff. But we only found a few trends resolving this. Alternative energy, we're getting more knowledge. There are more women taking positions of influence. Young people think they're, and so forth. So the balance is a lot of disturbing forces that have created a crisis. It's a crisis for the planet, I think, as a whole. And we did a little survey, found that people estimate there's like a 60 to 70% probability of either major catastrophe where civilization stops altogether in major parts of the globe, or just disasters that are, life goes on, but under drastically different circumstances. So there's, I think it's almost clear to most people that we're in a major crisis. You can stop people on the street and ask them. They know. After the pandemic, for instance, the pandemic showed that we have global problems. The pandemic is a global problem, but we don't have global solutions. The system doesn't work. We need major changes in the system, and muddling through is no longer feasible, I don't think. The threat is just too great. And so that's, any questions about this? I hope you find this convincing. Okay, let's move on. I'm grateful for your attention. Now,
Bill,
okay.
when did you do the survey? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the survey was done about 3 or 4 years ago. I would think that the results would be worse now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Was that Kate?
Yeah.
I thought it was.
Yes.
Okay. So now here's why I think we are likely to see a revolution in thought. And let's look at the bullets on the left first, then we'll come to the data on the right a little later. All stages of evolution have been driven by revolutions in thought. The best example is the industrial age. The industrial age was made possible by what the sociologist Max Weber called the Protestant ethic, the rise of the Protestant ethic, the belief that if you worked hard, saved money, and focused on your self-interest, that was good, that this is what God wanted. You focus on making money for yourself. Well, that view is what fueled the industrial age, and it still is dominant, I think. And that's the problem. We still have a culture globally, I think, that is driven by money, power, and self-interest. And those things no longer work. They worked for the last few thousand years, perhaps, but they no longer work now because the need now is to integrate across organizations, across governments, to create a planet that works. And those values just aren't going to do that. And that's recognized by the World Economic Forum. They understand this. Pew Research Foundation did some studies, found that majorities of people want to see transformations in economics, healthcare, and so forth. And I've said before, consciousness implies maturity. That's what consciousness is about. It's like teenagers growing up. If you've raised children, you know that when they're teens, they can get very confused. They're physically perfect, at that age. They're powerful physically, but they don't know how to cope in society. They don't know who they are, what they want to do, and they're in enormous pain. They make terrible problems for themselves. But at some point, the pain becomes so severe that they stop fighting. They accept their responsibility to become adults and define what they want to do, and they go on and do it. And that's roughly what we need as a world. We have to stop acting like children, accept responsibility for the mess that the world is in, and start figuring out how to resolve it. So that's basic, I think. And there are some trends that I think are moving in this direction. The Me Too movement, for instance, I think, has made it clear that women will not tolerate men harassing them. The Black Lives Matters movement, I think, is a global phenomenon as well. Black people feel the same way. Employees, 5 million American workers have quit their jobs, asking for better conditions and so forth. And I want to talk more about democratic business later, but this is enormously important. The business corporation, whom we have all grown to hate because we thought they were greedy and focused on making money, is in the throes of a major revolution in thought. They have now accepted the role of all stakeholders, employees, customers, and so forth, as equally legitimate with making money. And I'll tell you more about that later. But this business could lead us out of this mess, I think. And I also noticed that 160 some nations around the world have agreed on a minimum global tax for corporations to avoid tax evasion. Now, I think that's remarkable that was done, and that's the kind of thing that we need more of. One last point, note that in this country, the year 2024, I think is shaping up to be a moment of truth. The next presidential election, Trump or one of his supporters will probably run against a Democrat. And I think climate change will be worse by then. And all of these problems will be worse by then. The country's going to have to face up to, what does it want? Does it want more nonsense, or does it want to be responsible? So I think that's going to be a critical turning point. Let's talk about the data here. Now, here's my forecast on when a global consciousness is likely to arrive at the leading edge among influencers and government and media and academia and so forth, corporations, the leading edge, when they start talking about it and advocating it. And you can see we had 29 responses, and it looks like it's a bimodal distribution, but it's a little more complex than that. If you just look at the first three bars on the left, that averages 2029. But if I move to the right and add everything up to 2046, 2050, up to here, which is all of the data, and consider these two outliers as the tails, the forward tails of the distribution, I get a 2031. That's not very different. So I'm taking 2030 as our best estimate for when we're likely to see some kind of a global consciousness among the leading edge, with the understanding that there are 8 responses, that's 28% of the total, which say it'll be much later or never. And their reasons represent good points that have to be considered, that have to be taken into account. These are the obstacles. They just don't think such dramatic change can be made, that the resistance is overwhelming. People will not change the way they think. They're convinced of that. And they think that you can just muddle through, just kind of make little changes as we go along. Those are the reasons why they think much later never. So we consider that as valid objections that have to be overcome. Any thoughts or questions about this? Please tell me what you're thinking. Okay. Now, here's what I mean by global consciousness. And the definition is very precise. It's a vision for a sustainable world. I don't see this as a utopia or wishful thinking or something that's unrealistic. It's comparable to the vision that any organization must develop before it can undertake a project. Before you start a new product line or start a business, you have to have a vision of where you're going. And only then can you proceed to getting there. So this is a vision that is badly needed for a troubled world. That's, I think, what we lack very much today. There is no vision. There is no plan. There is no sense of where we're going. So this is an attempt to provide a vision that will make the world sustainable, resolve those threats. And it's based upon principles of integration. You have to unify different actors, alliances, cooperation, all of these values that are really different than the values of that we've been living with, which is money, self-interest, and power. So this is, those are still valid, of course. Those principles are still valid, but we also need this type of thinking. And the work we've done at TechCast trying to define this has led to these 5 principles, and we've used this with other groups. We've taken the groups through this as a little tutorial, and it seems to resonate. They find it very compelling. It seems to make sense to them. I'll just mention these very briefly. The first one's kind of obvious. A planet with life on it is so rare. We've been looking for 50 years for other life systems and other planets, nothing. This planet is a miracle. We should start treating it that way. And I think everybody knows that. We just have to start doing this in reality. You can still use the environment, but you have to do it in a way that's sustainable. It's very simple, really. Most people accept that idea. Secondly, you have to manage the world as a unified whole. It's really a de facto a single system now. The economic systems are all connected. For instance, the pandemic messed up supply chains. Look what happened. So it's economically unified, and the information systems are global as well. So it's in fact behaving as a unified system, but we don't have a governance structure to manage it that way. So it doesn't mean we need big government or some bureaucracy or anything. It simply means that parties like nations and corporations should work on common problems because it's in their enlightened self-interest. It's just for the benefit of themselves to do it. So this would form a spontaneous or somehow guided effort to solve problems like the pandemic, solve them globally. And the third is still democracy and enterprise. These are the 2 major principles of Western society, of society around the world. It's what we've learned over centuries of experimentation, that these are the best principles for organizing society because they're based upon knowledge. Democracy based upon the collective intelligence of the electorate, and markets are based upon the knowledge of buyers and sellers. So these are powerful ideas. The problem is we don't use them except on a very grand scale. The typical corporation, for instance, is hardly democratic today, and it doesn't even use free enterprise within its own ranks. Big corporations that span the globe can be thought of as pretty much like the old Soviet Union, planned economies. Everything is run from the top down with some input from the lower ranks, but really they're planned economies. So I think we need to use these principles in all institutions. I'll say more about that later. And then diversity is not a problem. Diversity is an asset. People who are different from us have knowledge that we don't have. They have culture that we don't have. They have understandings that we don't have. And they can give us their support if we will work out relationships with them. So we should stop treating diversity as a problem and recognize that it's really a great asset. And finally, every community has to celebrate its accomplishments and its solidarity. And we need more global celebrations. And I'll just close by noting that I don't know how this will look like. It may not happen at all, but I think it's likely something like this. It could be called global ethics. It could be seen as a global collective epiphany or the move for a sustainable world. Who knows? But I think something like this is essential if we're going to survive as a civilization. And I think it's likely, but it may not happen. That's true. Any comments or questions? Boy, you people are unusually quiet. Okay.
To the end, because we have a lot of things.
Okay, good. Now, I'm not going to say much here except to note that in an age of consciousness, the main task is not to manage knowledge. That's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. We've been managing knowledge, but now we've got to manage consciousness. And we use a lot of the methods that we've always used. These are things that we've always done to change the way we think. And so we have to do a better job of using these technologies to shape consciousness into something that is civilized, something that'll work. And okay, now, sorry. Yeah, now here's, I'm just going to say a little bit about the challenge to transform big institutions like business. The Business Roundtable decision to recognize the legitimacy of stakeholder goals is really historic. I have been studying this for 40 years, since I first won a major prize, the Mitchell Prize, in 1977 for a paper titled Beyond the Profit Motive, and included $10,000, which was a lot of money in 77. So this was, I think, a major paper, but I was so dismayed that for decades, very little would change. But I studied this for all these years, and I think I'm amazed to see that it's finally happening. It's here now. The Business Roundtable decision has spurred corporations to change dramatically. They understand that they have to do it because the problems are so severe and they don't think government can do it alone, or maybe not at all. So they know they've got to leap into the breach and start dealing with some of these massive social problems, especially where their operations impact upon them. And so they're doing it. They're calling it various names. ESG is a common term that the consulting firm McKinsey uses, but there are other terms being used. I think we should focus on the fact that we're talking about a collaborative enterprise. We're talking about a corporation that cooperates among all of its partners in order to create more value for everybody. Everybody benefits, including making more money for shareholders. So this could be a competitive advantage. Lots of corporations have done this throughout history, but they've always been relegated to the margins because the main culture did not understand what they were doing. And we simply have to bring those people into the mainstream now. So I think this is just an enormous change. And I was so impressed when Fortune accepted my piece titled Free the Fortune 500. It's a full-throated call to transform capitalism into democratic enterprise. I mean, I didn't pull any punches. And the fact that they are willing to print this tells me that they know things are changing. Now, something similar is needed for all of these other institutions, but I'm not going to get into that.
I must say that I'm so suspicious of this one.
I know. Yeah.
But you see lots of evidence to the effect that business is changing. You see lots of it now. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, they're serious. They know they've got to change. They don't know quite how to do it yet. They're still, just dabbling with it. But I'm hoping that things like my piece in Fortune will stir up some interest and give people some movement in the right direction. But you're right. The corporations have inherited like 100 years of terrible reputation. Terrible. You're right, Job.
Okay, well, I'm heartened by the fact that you see significant changes going on. It really is encouraging.
Yeah, my piece in Fortune ends by saying that this requires a revolution, a democratic revolution, and Americans are the best people to do it because we invented modern democracy. So I issue a call for the business leaders around the world to free themselves from their financial shackles.
What are there any events that you would see as transforming? I mean, you said the
well,
business
when some of the really big corporations come out and are very clear that this is what they're doing, that will start changing things, I think. Yeah, but I don't know. Let's move on because we want to just talk a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is where I want you to think about yourself. What does this mean for you? How do you think we're going to resolve the crisis of global maturity and create a sustainable world? What are the prospects for this shift to a global, and what happens if it doesn't happen? I mean, the alternative, I think, is pretty grim. And what is your concept of global consciousness? What makes sense to you? Would you try and pass it on to others and so forth? I think this is so important that I am starting a workshop on global consciousness, and I've got a lot of people interested in helping me do this to just help people understand that we need a shift in consciousness very badly. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And
talk a little bit about what you're going to do with your group on global consciousness.
Well, we're not sure yet. We're just organizing this group. I've got about 10 entrepreneurs, futurists, who are people who've advocated ideas like this, and they see the need. So we're just starting. We don't know what we're going to do. Let's open. Let me get out of screen share, and let's see everybody, and let's have a little discussion. Let's see. We have 15 minutes. Is that right, Erica? And then after that, people can stay on if they like, but the meeting as a whole, I think, will end in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I know this dumps a lot on you. Please tell me what you think. What are your doubts? What are your questions?
I'm Janet, and I read your book, Bill, and I am in whole agreement with what you're saying. And then I read the Wall Street Journal because I think it's the most more or less neutral publication out there. And I read yesterday where they're telling us that the ministers and rabbis and whoever are leaving their flocks because nobody's going to church.
Yeah.
And they're out. One of them became a postman because he wanted a regular job. Others go and work in the Ford plant or something. And people are just getting away from that. And I agree with your consciousness, but somehow, how are people gonna know about this? Because most people don't even think about this. They have no idea what it's all about.
Well, you're right. That's,
Wonder how it's gonna happen, and I'm gonna be cranky and stay alive until it happens, because I want, I'm interested in seeing how all this garbage is gonna come out.
yeah, that's right.
Also, think about the Romans. They say the Romans just were so devious and derelict and disgusting that they just disappeared. That might happen to us too. Nobody knows.
Well, that's right. That's why I'm starting this workshop on global consciousness. I give 2 or 3 talks a week on this, and I hear, for the most part, enthusiastic acceptance. I think people need something like this to understand what's going on, and that's what I'm trying to do. I hear maybe 20–30% of the people are skeptical. They've been so discouraged by the events of the past few decades, they don't believe anything good can happen. And my reaction to that, and I know many people here feel the same way, that's the way Job felt about corporations. My main thought about that is, if you have no hope, then that's kind of self-fulfilling. Things will work out pretty badly. So, and where do you find hope? Well, first of all, I think you have to just have faith in the powers of social evolution that I have laid out. I think they're demonstrably clear that we're entering this last stage of social evolution, consciousness now. And the main point of consciousness is to develop, understand who you are and what you want, and to get it, to become responsible. So I have faith in that, in the trends of social evolution.
Excuse me, I just have one thought. I have a mantra, and my mantra is faith, not fear, because we're all born very fearful. And I have hope and I have faith, and I say that every single day, just a comment. And I hope this all happens because I have hope, you know?
Well, that's where I was going. You have to have hope. If you don't have hope, nothing changes. If you have hope, then you can act to make change. But if you're stuck in despondency, then you're a victim of the forces, and you submit. You give
I
up.
think you need more than faith and hope. I think what you need is courage on all levels, emotional, physical, intellectual. And I have seen a lot of changes since I've been here. For example, in the last 10 years, I couldn't believe, but most of the bestsellers in New York Times, or I don't know, maybe Wall Street, they were spiritual books, which means people need that. We need to have our spirit alive and kicking, because we have been completely pushed down with money, and I really believe that's why, even so you said the rabbis and are going out, but how come then there is something replacing it? What is replacing it is Buddhism, is meditation, is Stoicism. So many people are now, do you know of somebody called Ryan Holiday? He's been, in fact, feeding all the CEOs about Stoics, because Stoics were philosophers. They were, in the time when the Roman Empire was falling down, they were still telling people. And now we know that these things happen, and because of the internet and all the global opening and communication, which we didn't have before.
Yes, thank you, Gisela. That's a good point. I think you're exactly right. That's wonderful. What else?
And then, there's something I'd like to say about Victor Hugo, which also has to be, I forgot the exact quote, but it says, an idea that has come to maturity, let's say consciousness, is bound to arrive, because it comes from below, and the consciousness is rising, and at one point it's unstoppable.
Yeah, well,
and the wars have stopped it most of the time.
Right.
I think, anyway.
Bill, we have a number of
Thank you, Gisela. Let's hear from other people. Erica, go ahead.
We've got a number in the chat. Someone wanted to know how Facebook's metamorphosis into Meta influences the conversation.
You know, I was active in Second Life. Remember Second Life 15, 20 years ago? It felt terrible. It felt very awkward. I don't know if Metaverse is going to work. If it does, I don't know what the effect would be. I don't know. I know Second Life gave rise to wild fantasies, crazy fantasies, pornography. It was crazy. It was like social media on steroids. So I'm a little fearful of Metaverse. Maybe others have an opinion they can offer.
Well, the next question, or what are the forces pushing us to change?
Well, I think the rise of women to power, for one thing. I was stunned a couple of months ago. Somebody.
Please summarize it very quickly.
Tom, are you speaking, or do you want to mute yourself?
I was just figuring I better get in line with the chat, so I had 2 quick questions, but I'll wait till my turn.
Okay. Yeah, I was fascinated by a study that came out a couple of months ago, and it compared the 6 countries that did the worst under the pandemic with the 6 who did best. And the 6 worst companies were led by men. The 6 best were led by women. That tells me a lot right there. So I'm delighted to see women moving into positions of authority. I think they have the sense of the talents for cooperation and support that are needed today, and for wisdom, for being judicial, thoughtful, rather than like Putin's attack on Ukraine. That is the stupidest thing I can imagine. It's going to hurt Russia. It's a powerful example of a male ego run amok. He wants to restore greater Soviet Union, and it's too late for that. Yeah. And he doesn't care if he's going to start a war. Yeah. It's criminal. It's exactly the kind of thinking the world doesn't need. It's a good example of what men have done all along. So, and I think young people intuitively understand this. They do not see the differences between nationalities or nations or genders or race. They are the first global citizens, and I think they understand this. I think events are going to surprise us, though. You know, I've laid out something that sounds pretty rational, kind of a scientific perspective, but life doesn't work out that way. It's always it's always messy. It always surprises you. So I think we're going to be surprised. The 2024 election is really, that's going to be very critical, I think.
Yeah.
Well, the next question gets into a former life of mine and a former life of the person asking the question. I think talking about, can you say more about the space age and how we'll get there?
Well, we're exploring the solar system pretty well. That's pretty clear. And I think there's very little to stop us from doing that pretty thoroughly over the next 20 or 30 years, especially with space now commercialized. I mean, what Elon Musk has done, and Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson, it's just amazing what they've accomplished. You know, this is free enterprise. It's just amazing. So I think we're going to explore the solar system pretty well, but deep space is totally different. The nearest star system, Alpha Centauri, is 4 light years away. That's 40 miles at the speed of light. Nobody thinks you can travel at the speed of light. So it's going to take, it'd be like 50 or 100 years or something just to go to the nearest star. So the problems are enormous, and they're going to require breakthroughs in physics in our understanding of the universe. But I think they are going to happen. I have a nice paper on this, the coming space age, and I think it's likely about 2050. My best guess, and I'm good at this. I've been doing this my whole academic career. I forecast the beginning of the information age, the knowledge age, at the year 2000, 20 years before it happened. When I was a very young professor, I could see it. It was just so clear. And that's exactly when it happened. The year 2000 is when all of a sudden corporations started calling themselves knowledge organizations. The big new fad in business schools was knowledge management. Most people became knowledge workers. So I think I've got a sense for this. And I think I'm pretty right about starting the information age. I'm sorry, the age of consciousness about 2020. I think that's pretty good. It's pretty
That's
obvious.
actually a perfect lead into the next question.
Yeah, well,
about,
my
are
point
you-
was, I'm making one point though. That's the way I feel about 2050 for the mature global order, which then would lead to the beginning of a space age. 2050, that's my, I feel pretty confident in that. Go ahead. What else?
Are you and your work groups yourselves influencers by shining a light on trends supporting your idea of global consciousness? Are you suggesting that such efforts as yours could be used to manipulate global thinking in a positive way?
I certainly hope so. That's the whole point. Yes, we're trying my best to influence people. That's really why I do this. I mean, you don't write a book to make money. There's no money in writing a book, especially when you think of the.
So Bill, that question was mine, Kate Perry. So I guess I know you've got, because here I am chomping at the bit, you know, what's it going to take to propel us all forward on your trajectories that you outlined in your initial charts? So what's your action plan?
Well, I'm doing the best I can. I give 2 or 3 talks like this every week. The book is out. I'm planning to hold these workshops on global consciousness. That's all I can do. But
I'd say that's pretty important. Thank you, Bill.
yeah, but that's what. But the reason the workshops on global consciousness appeal to me is I would like to get 50 or 100 people like you convinced of this idea, and then you go out and tell your friends. That's really my hope, that you folks find this compelling and urgent, and that you would tell your friends.
So I guess we're the influencers, Kate.
Yeah. Please, there are
So
lots.
Tom had a couple questions.
Just real quick. Yeah, I don't. I mean, just finished reading Amartya Sen's amazing memoir, and long ago I read his Development and Freedom, and I just wondered whether whether you had drawn anything on all of his amazing writings. And the other was a question.
Tom, who's the author?
Amartya Sen, the economist, and he's written a whole lot. Well, a social choice theory has been his main focus, and growing up in India and studying at the school of Rabindranath Tagore, he was just very deeply concerned with the question of inequality in India and all over the world.
Oh, yes.
How this can be overcome,
Yes.
and talking about democracy and so on. The other question I had for you, though, was just, I thought there was a contradiction, it struck me anyway, between you're talking about the end of knowledge and then saying, in order to have democracy and enterprise, you're going to have to use information. And of course, we now have tremendous capacity for analyzing information and putting it to use. So is it really the end of knowledge?
No. I'm sorry if I gave that impression, Tom. No, knowledge will always remain essential, absolutely. And we're going to keep developing more knowledge. I mean, there's the technology revolution is more than information to technology. It's everything. Every field is exploding. No question about that. It's just that there is this domain that transcends knowledge that is problematic. And that's where we have to gain control. We have to make peace with ourselves on the level of our values and beliefs and emotions. And then we can use knowledge as we should.
And I think some have spoken of emotional knowledge.
Yeah. Emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, knowledge is, I don't mean to diminish the importance of knowledge at all. No, it's just that the next step is consciousness. These subjective factors. This is where it's going to become more intense, more intense. You know, I think you're going to see more people with exploring their own fantasies and God knows what else, and having lots of different ideas, because we're all exploring this domain of consciousness, and it's enormous, it's infinite, and it includes bad stuff as well as good stuff. It's an enormous challenge. It's like a teenager finally finding the self-discipline and the wisdom to grow up. It's for that teenager, that's enormously difficult. And this is hard for us as a planet. I don't mean to diminish the importance of it. It's or the difficulty. We may not be able to do it. Some people say that the reason we can't find intelligent life in the universe is that other civilizations didn't make it through this crisis of low maturity. They extinguished themselves. I don't believe that. I think life is tenacious. It is, we know it is, it's tenacious. And I think the natural path for civilizations is successful maturity. That's my strong belief, but that's just my belief. I may be wrong. I don't think, it's like 10% of civilizations survive and the other 90% go extinct. I don't believe that. I think most of them probably do. There's probably life out there. We just don't know how to find it. And I bet the vast majority of those civilizations have made it through this critical point. It's a very critical point, I think. And we're so lucky to be alive when this is happening. It's just absolutely amazing. It's amazing that we're here when civilization comes to a fulfillment, so to speak. 2050 is 30 years. I'm not going to live to see that, but I think I'd like to live to see the mental revolution. Yeah, that would be great.
I hope you're right about 50-50. It seems to me the obstacles to that are enormous. I think, for example, that you had something about your global ethical code and you had something about human dignity. I think the way Russia and China value human dignity, individual human dignity, and it would require major revolutions in both countries, among others, and even in our own country, for heaven's sakes. There's a long way to go. But I am so taken with what you're thinking and how you're going about it.
I'm gonna call on people. I want to hear from other people.
Well, you've got more questions, Bill. We haven't even got through the chat.
Okay.
Håkan had a couple points he wanted to make. Do you want to speak up, Håkan?
Håkan, go ahead.
I wrote my questions. I got to go back to them, but
No,
One was about the.
no, I see that I find from reading parts of the book so far, third, that you use this term of consciousness in a fuzzy way that leaves me behind. I agree totally with your problem description of what's going on the globe and the lack of global systems to deal with the issues. But the next step seems very difficult to think of.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about defining consciousness. The first thing to recognize is that scientists really don't know what it is. And that's the big discussion in science these days. What is consciousness? Some say it doesn't exist at all. Everything comes from the brain. And some say it's a fundamental quality of the universe, like mass and energy and light. So there's enormous difference of opinion, and the discussions are very abstract. I like to make it tangible. That's why my pyramid is useful. It describes consciousness in terms of the states of mind that we go through every day. We know them. We know what perception is. We know what memory is. We know what a decision is. We know what emotion is. We know what a value is. So that's the way I like to describe it in operational terms. Hakan, does that make sense?
Yep. It gets part of the way. The other practical issue, since you said you want to get down to earth, are your efforts now of the organizing people connected in any way to there's the World Bank Retirement Association, the 1818 Society is involved with this group that gives money to what they call social entrepreneurs, which to me would be an expression of the practical changes that you're looking for, which aren't embedded in financial corporations or industrial corporations, but applies the same concepts to social change.
Yeah, no, I think we'll probably look for some of those financing sources. I think that's right. I'd like to hear from other people. Do you have more questions in the chat, Rebecca, Erica?
Yes. Linda, do you want to ask your question about business?
Yeah.
Sure. So you talked about business leading the way, and there have been times when I have felt that way over the past few years with certain social issues. For instance, when North Carolina passed that bathroom bill for transgender people, and businesses started to shun North Carolina, and I think the NCAA basketball tournament did. And do you see that as the beginning of like a consciousness on the part of businesses?
Let's see. I don't know. What you've described is nice, Linda, no question about it. But those are kind of the quasi-philanthropic things, that's social responsibility. The belief that business should do these good things for ethical reasons. And that's fine. I have no argument with that. But what I describe is what I've studied is something different. To understand the structure of any organization as a socioeconomic system with about 5 major players, and that the system is more effective if they all work together. So I advocate this on the grounds of functionality, that it would create more value for everybody. And that is ultimately what has to motivate business people. They will not remain motivated by philanthropy alone, by doing good things. So I argued on that basis that this is a competitive advantage.
Although there were also other examples where consumers took initiative and, for instance, stopped buying certain products and that seems to work when it's a concerted effort.
Right. Now that means that consumers want a voice in the way the company is producing and distributing their products. Exactly. And that's what if a company can improve that link by working with their client base more closely, they will benefit. I mean, that's the whole point, that there are gains to be made if managers can start forming strategic working relationships with all of the groups that control resources that they need. I mean, labor is a major resource, the buying power of consumers and so forth. So I see this as just really good management. The next step in the expansion of management. But it's very hard to do this because the ideology is such a deterrent. Some people are so committed to the concept of capitalism. They really mean markets, I think. Markets are one thing, but capitalism is something else. I mean, market economies are all over the world, but they're managed differently. The Nordic nations use civic associations. Germans have their unions are sit on their boards. They have labor management relationships. China has state capitalism, so you can run markets lots of different ways. And the way we have run our markets here has been terrible. The single-minded focus on money. We always thought that that was a price to pay because it was a more effective system. It's not. The performance data does not bear that out. Other countries, like the Nordic countries, the Northern European countries, the Japanese, Israel, they outperform us economically, and they give everybody wonderful benefits. This system has not been good. It's not been the best system for Americans. The present system is, I think, a result of what the Reagan Revolution 40 years ago. When Reagan was elected, the national focus shifted from government to business. And that those 40 years have run their course. I think people now understand that Reaganomics, that belief system, is no longer valid. And we're looking for another, a different model right now. And my hope is that something like democratic enterprise would emerge. But yeah, let's hear from other people. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
That's all right. Someone wanted to know if you had any information on local work groups that they could join in on.
Sorry, I don't.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions?
Please.
Jump in.
Bill, it's Bob. Addressing equality, what do you think about?
Can you speak up, Tom? Bob, can you speak up a little bit?
What do you, addressing inequality, which is a massive problem all over the world, what do you think about this idea of universal basic income to address that, or to go some way to addressing that? Would you be?
Yeah, the universal basic incomes, and there are 2 or 3 different terms that are being used. The basic idea is the same, that rather than have 20 or 30 different welfare programs, it would be more efficient to just give everybody a small minimum income with no strings attached. And that's been experimented with in a number of countries. And I think it'll probably play a role. I think some countries will do that, do it effectively. But the big solution, I think, to income equality is to see business in different terms. If we saw it as a democratic enterprise, democratic enterprise, rather than, a profit-making system, then I think the need to award CEOs with, it's like the average CEO pay is like $25 million a year. It's obscene.
It is.
So there would be no need for that. I think we would become more realistic about this and pay senior executives an attractive sum, but not in the millions of dollars. And things would level out, I think, naturally, if we saw the corporation as a community, a corporate community of interest groups.
Hope you're right.
But who knows?
Bill,
Yes.
Alec Watson.
Oh, hi, Alec.
How are you doing?
Good.
I have a new Mac, and I'm unable to figure out how to send anything to the chat.
Well, just tell us.
So I'm going to tell you my simple question.
Yeah.
In
Thank
your
you.
view, is consciousness confined to human beings?
Yep.
Does it extend to mammals, all life?
Mm.
Is it a human invention, like religion is, for example? I'm having a little trouble getting a grip on your definition of consciousness.
Well, yeah, thank you, Alex. That's so good. I'm so glad you came. That's wonderful to have you here. Well, I can refer you back again to that second or third slide that showed the triangle of structure of consciousness. I like to think of it in those operational terms rather than mystical ideas. And if you think in those terms, yes, animals are conscious. They have perception, and they have memories, and they make decisions, and they have emotions, sure. It may not be as intense as our consciousness, but yes. And some people think that all matter is conscious. Quantum theory holds that a particle cannot be defined in terms of its location until it is observed. That requires the role of a human being, somebody to observe matter before it becomes reality. So you could argue that all matter is alive in a way. I hope that suits you, Alec. What do you think?
Well, you helped me get there.
Okay.
Because there's a big difference whether it is, you touched on this earlier, whether it is some kind of cosmic phenomenon like air that then people absorb and work with one with another, or whether it is something that is does not exist until human beings start thinking about it and creating it, and there must be many other options besides those two, but depending on how you define it, I think would have an influence on how you could proceed along your evolutionary trajectory.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I can't deal with the mysterious theories about the philosophy. To make this book work, I had to be concrete, and that's why I focus on the cognitive functions that we experience every day: emotions, values, beliefs, memory, decisions. And, collectively, I also in the book define that as human spirit. I don't think that's going too far. See, I don't want to get into religion and supernatural beings. I don't want to get into that. That's endless. I define human spirit as the collection of those cognitive functions. And I think that's a good definition. Webster's defines human spirit as frame of mind, mood, that kind of thing. And so that's the basis of the way I speak about spirituality in the book. Human spirit as the things that we experience every day. And I think that's a good definition. And I think it's long past time that we started thinking in those terms. The inability to accept the fact that we are spiritual beings is one of the great tragedies of our time. We are spiritual beings, and we should start acknowledging that, I think. And the way to do it is you don't have to get into religion. It's just the human qualities that we experience every day. That's human spirit. That is a powerful force. And that's another reason I have faith in that this will work out, because the human spirit is indomitable. It's just, as a Catholic, from what I know of theology, I'm impressed with, for instance, Teilhard de Chardin's vision that the world will evolve into a noosphere, a web of consciousness, envelop the entire earth. That's the way the book starts. I think he's exactly right. So ultimately, I think this human spirit is a manifestation of this far greater power, whatever it is that we want to call God, but who knows what it is? I have no idea what it is. But I think it's a manifestation of that far greater power, and that power is what is driving the life cycle of evolution. It is driven. It is attracted to consciousness, to the source of the power. It started out very simply, tribes, agriculture, making things in factories, service jobs, knowledge, and then consciousness. That is approaching the infinite, approaching whatever force powers the universe, it seems to me. But I don't want to get into those philosophical terms. That's why I like to define it in terms of what we experience every day. Alec, what do you think? You're,
Oops, you're on mute.
you're muted. You're muted.
It's still muted.
Still muted. Still muted. Well, while Alec's figuring that out, let's hear from somebody else. I'm going to call on people. Patty Hampshire, you're such a lovely lady. Please tell us, what do you think about all this? Unmute yourself, Patty. Unmute yourself. Unmute. Okay.
We sit here as educated, relatively successful people, and I'm wondering how we can find a way to influence those people who don't have the same advantages, because there are an awful lot of people in the world, most of whom don't have these advantages, and it's difficult to see that we can move the whole world in this direction.
Yeah, that's right. It's humbling.
Is it education? Is education one of the answers, or what? There's more to it than that, I think.
You know, my guess is that consciousness, a shifted consciousness, takes on a life of its own. It spreads like a movement, and it probably can't be stopped. Kind of just Lang referred to, like the Black Lives Matters movement. You know, when it started, it just spread. It spread around the world. My guess is that if this were to happen, it would spread. We wouldn't have to push it. It would just spread of its own power. But well, who knows? We'll see. It may not happen at all. Thank you, Patty. That was very thoughtful. Thank you so much.
Hey, Bill, this is Alec again. I'm finally back on.
Yeah.
You don't think I shut you off because I was unhappy with the response?
Yeah, that's what I took it. You were shutting me off, Alec.
I had no screen, no anything. I had to go all the way back to the beginning and re-enter the whole thing.
Okay, yeah.
So now I'll shut up.
No, any more thoughts? I want to call on more people. Peggy, sitting there next to Tom, what do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised at your positive take on how this evolution has occurred. In particular, when you talk about the knowledge revolution having as a success, and you turn to the existence of all the various devices that we have now as showing that success, when in fact that was just a very clever application by the corporate sector of a technology that had existed in the nonprofit world for a couple decades, as you know. And so the point, your starting point depended upon the whole capitalist movement. And your endpoint kind of sees that fading away, which I would like to see. But I mean, if the knowledge revolution had really succeeded, why do we have so many deniers of the information that they're getting on their devices, for instance, about the pandemic? And how doesn't that experience kind of dampen the positive view of what lays ahead?
Well,
Sorry.
no, that's a great question, and it's one that that's an issue that always comes up: the relationship between knowledge and consciousness. And you're right, people. It's obvious today that people are not burdened by the facts. That's exactly right, but that's not a failure of knowledge; it's a failure of consciousness.
Well, they haven't achieved knowledge. If they're
No, well, they have the knowledge, but they want to just deny it. I mean, what it says is that consciousness is more powerful than knowledge. The beliefs and values largely determine the knowledge we choose to accept. So that is, I think, the way consciousness works. all of those people who believe that Trump won the election, you're not going to talk them out of it. They've convinced themselves. And it demonstrates the power of belief over fact. So that's why we have to focus on consciousness, because that's where behavior originates in values and beliefs and emotions rather than logic. I hope that helps.
I think it does raise the whole question about the very, very systematic manipulation of knowledge.
Yes,
Forces that do not wish to see changes occur.
exactly. The propaganda. I mean, you can see it. Putin is putting it out. Exactly. And the horrible disinformation that social media spews out. I have a piece that was just accepted by CEO Magazine, How to Tame the Social Media Monster. It's out of control. It dominates our society. It's made politics impossible. No, you're exactly right. This is a very complex thing. It's you're all raising really good points. I don't have answers to many of them. I've just done my best to understand what this means, and I think I've laid out the forces of social evolution that are driving it. That's the main thing that I hope you take away from this. That the path of social evolution is in this direction. That's I think the main point.
Well, Bill, I think, oh, sorry. Go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just going to invite other people to comment. That's all.
We're running out of time, I'm afraid.
We could stop. We could stop now.
So I just, I think it's only fitting that spring is here. It's glorious outside, and you have just given us a breath of fresh air and fresh thinking, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I like that you laid out principles guiding us forward, and I welcome all you village members to hold us accountable. And if you see us straying, we want to make this community part of the solution, and onward and upward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful, Erica. Wonderful closing comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was my great pleasure. Hope this has been useful to you.
Thank you.
Buy the book.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah.
I did.
Fantastic, Bill, fantastic.
Yes, let's have a book club.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
I think Bill cut out already. He was the first one out of here.
Good session, Erica. I'd love to see a book club around
really
this.
wonderful.
Book. Yeah, yeah.
Really wonderful. I think, yeah, I think it did help to read the book in advance for me to understand where he was going, but yeah. I
Well,
thought it was
for me, I'll be happy to have this hook today to